Welcome in, everybody, to the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. Today, we're going to be going through our top 48 running back rankings. And we're not going to do this the way we have in the past, where we're saying, here's our tiers, and let's argue, me and Dave, back and forth, and running backs that we disagree on. Actually, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at the running backs that we are higher on or lower on than consensus, how our ranks differ from ADP, and let's open up the conversation a bit more. You guys have heard us talk about the stats and which players we really like, but let's open up that conversation a bit more to guys that we think could surprise us here in 2024. Dave, as you get closer to the fantasy season, what changes here in your rankings, if anything?
So anybody who knows me, knows you, listens to the show, knows that I am a best ball junkie. So earlier in the offseason, I'll admit, I do adhere a little bit closer to ADP with my rankings because I'm drafting hundreds of teams and I want to have, exposure to every single player in case I'm wrong, and portfolio management and all these sorts of things. But now that we are in the heart of redraft season, I throw ADP out the window. I am taking swings. I want to get my guys. So my rankings aren't going to be quite as close to ADP as they were a month or two ago. This is where I really want to go out and get my guys and take some big stances here. One other thing I want to say, you said we're talking about our top 48 today. Just want to say, under promise and over deliver. That's what we're going to do, because not only do we have our top 48, but we're going to finish the show talking about some deep, deep sleepers as well. So I think we're going to get through 50 something running backs today.
Don't do that. You just overpromised. You did the exact opposite. Before you promise
we'll
anything
deliver.
Else,
We'll deliver on that overpromise.
We're going to deliver something. We're going to deliver something. Let's hop right into the rankings here. You and I have a near identical top 10. So our consensus, the two of us, I guess it's a small consensus, but the way our rankings shape out, Christian McCaffrey at 1, Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall are basically tied for 2, so put them in whatever order you'd like. Then we've got Jonathan Taylor at 4, and Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs are tied as well, so you can put them in whatever order you want for 4 and 5. Then at 6, it's Saquon Barkley. At 7, Derrick Henry. At 8, Travis Etienne. 9, Kyren Williams. And then at 10, Isiah Pacheco. Dave, you and I have essentially the same top 10 here. What I want to ask, and maybe it's someone not even mentioned here in the top 10, but is there a running back currently not being drafted in the first round that you think has the absolute best chance to be the RB1 overall this season? We haven't seen it happen that often, but sometimes a running back comes out of nowhere and surprises us.
Yeah, I mean, if it's anybody, and I think, he's going to be close to top 10 in ADP in a lot of rankings, but Devon Achane, we saw him do on a per-touch basis last year, just absolutely broke fantasy football when he was on the field. And there are concerns that you and I both talked about, injury concern, size concern, new Dutch competition in the backfield with Jaylen Warren. There's a lot of reasons for concern, but if he is able to maintain that efficiency from last year, he could absolutely finish as the overall RB1. We already saw in the preseason game over the weekend that they were lining him up out wide and he was getting downfield targets. I mean, if they start to use him in ways like that, where he's getting jet sweeps, he's getting end arounds, he's getting runs up the middle, lining up out wide, lining up in the slot, it sounds like Mike McDaniel just wants to do whatever he can to get the ball in his hands. Of course, we'll see how his body can hold up to that sort of workload, but given his efficiency and his speed in this offense, he could absolutely finish as the overall RB1.
Yeah, we know that Devon Achane has that talent. We obviously saw it last year. We saw that the Miami Dolphins offense is good enough to always be in scoring position no matter what. Some interesting stats here for Devon Achane. Most fantasy points per opportunity of any running back over the last 12 years. And this is by a wide margin, a list that has players like Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Raheem Mostert, his teammate, is on there twice as just highly efficient players. Now, some of those players, what we saw is that they got a lot of volume. I know that's going to be a lot of people's question here with Devon Achane, is what kind of volume are we going to see? Last year in 9 games with Raheem Mostert, Achane was getting 15 opportunities per game. The targets per route run was nuts. The first read targets are nuts. Everything was just such a crazy efficiency game for Devon Achane. So, Dave, you talk about him potentially being a guy that's being drafted a little bit later that could finish as the RB1 overall. Why is he not a top 12 running back for you? Is it the fear of the split backfield?
It's partially that. It's also that we saw him pick up 5 injuries in his rookie season. And this is a guy who's under 190 pounds, 5'9". He's a little dude. As Chris Harris likes to say, he has tiny bones, and those tiny bones get injured frequently. So that along with Raheem Mostert and Jalen Wright both being there. Jeff Wilson Jr., unfortunately, is still in the mix as well. And I think that Mike McDaniel is just okay doing that. Like, he's not going to want to lean on one running back. I think we're just going to see this rotation where all four running backs are in the mix. So for best ball, I understand why Devon Achane is going where he is. I was in a draft yesterday where he went 12th overall because you need to swing for that high end range of outcomes when you're competing against 600,000 other people. But in a managed league, a regular fantasy football league with 11 of your buddies, I don't really feel comfortable taking Devon Achane that early because he might not pan out. And that's a lot of risk for an early pick like that. So I'm typically targeting Achane if he falls into like the 2-3 turn, but I'm not okay paying up for him where his current ADP is in a lot of drafts.
Yeah, and our ranking overall is a little bit lower than ADP right now. He's being drafted as the running back 9. I've got him as running back 11. You have him as running back 13. I want to add here that if there's a running back I think not getting drafted in the first round that could finish as the RB1 overall, it's Jahmyr Gibbs. And I've been up and down on Jahmyr Gibbs. And for me, it just comes down to one, it's an incredibly talented player on a very good offense, very good offensive line. And you start to look that almost every single one of these running backs has someone that they need to be worried about. So the David Montgomery thing doesn't really worry me as much. Like Bijan Robinson, you got to be worried about Tyler Algier. Breece Hall, you got to be worried about how often the Jets might actually have to pass or what they're doing with these young running backs. Jonathan Taylor, you got Anthony Richardson, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, like so on and so forth. So, all right, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs. Last year, 11 touchdowns. He's got the target volume. He's an explosive runner. From week 7 on to the end of the season, he was the RB4 in points per game. And I got to imagine the workload can only grow, and he's only going to get better, especially with the Lions actually losing some of their targets on offense. So I really like him for that. Dave, the last guy here in our top 12, number 12 for us, Ken Walker III, running back for the Seattle Seahawks. And you and I appear to be much higher than Football Guys consensus and ADP. Football Guys and ADP, average draft position, have Ken Walker going at running back 17. You and I each have him ranked as running back 12. Why are we higher on Ken Walker than the consensus?
I'm surprised that the consensus is that low. Ken Walker is a really good player, and I want him on my team. We've already heard Ryan Grubb gushing about him and how good he is and how they want to get him as many touches as possible. This guy, he's a very good receiver. We saw last year, he was 4th in the league in yards per reception. His ability to break tackles is phenomenal as well. 2nd in juke rate, 3rd in evaded tackles. He just checks every single box as a very good running back. He's got that just the breakaway speed every single time he touches the ball where he can take it to the house. And I think some of the concerns are about Zach Charbonnet and his looming presence there. And I totally understand this. But as I've said so many times when talking about the Seattle backfield this offseason, just because you're in on Ken Walker doesn't mean you're out on Zach Charbonnet. And just because you're in on Charbonnet doesn't mean you need to be out on Walker. I think the concerns have pushed both of these guys to a point where they're both good values, where, like you said, Walker is getting drafted as the RB17. Zach Charbonnet is typically going in like the running back 40 range. I'll draft both of them at that cost because we know the contingent upside is there for Zach Charbonnet. I think Ken Walker is still going to maintain the RB1 role here. Even if Zach Charbonnet does cut in a little bit, he's still good enough that on a limited workload, he can still give you a top 10 production. So I'm okay drafting both these guys in Seattle.
Hashtag both of them. That's
Both.
what you do when you're not sure. Honestly, I still love Ken Walker. I've loved him as a prospect, love him in the NFL. We've seen the receiving work grow. There has been more and more talk about how that's going to grow, how Ryan Grubb has talked about Ken Walker being special and how they need to feed him the rock. But let's just go even beyond the data and the stuff that we do here at Fantasy Football and just talk about some of the reporting that's going on. NFL Network's Peter Schrager says he has talked to his inside sources over in Seattle. And the player that is being mentioned that is going to be the straw that stirs the drink in Seattle is Ken Walker. That this is the guy they are using for their offense. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. Last year, from weeks 1 through 10, the first half of the season, prior to Ken Walker getting injured, where he had that bad oblique injury and that kind of ruined the rest of his season,
He had the
he was the
calf
running back
injury
7.
too. He picked up a couple injuries last year, if you
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, the oblique one was the one where like he actually missed time and then had to like come back. But
And the
even
calf one, he
that,
clearly wasn't at 100% when he returned with that calf injury. It was both kind of compounded last year, and we didn't see a strong finish.
yeah, and so weeks 1 through 10, he was the running back 7, and that's in PPR. The format that most people say, he's not going to be great for that because he's not catching passes. we're seeing a guy who was already top 7. And that was with the Seattle Seahawks offense just clearly not being up to snuff the way they were a year prior. So if the Seahawks offense is better and Ken Walker truly is the running back that this team wants to be building their offense around and utilizing in such a manner, I don't see why he's not a top 12 running back, especially with that top 7 point per game usage through the first 10 weeks of last year. All right, Dave, before we go to our next set of running back rankings here, I want to remind everybody we've got multiple ways you can enjoy this show, either here on youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy. If you're watching, please be sure to like this video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss an episode throughout the season. And then we've got our audio podcast that can be found on either Apple Podcast or Spotify. And guess what, Dave? We are announcing some winners today for the Listener League. I feel like we need one of those things that, like, you like the restaurants and like, we got a birthday today, and everyone comes out. Like, we should have like a whole bunch of Football Guy staffers like come through with candles and confetti and all kinds of stuff. That'd be ridiculous. All right, but we got our Listener League winners, and the winners, the 2 people being added to the Football Guys Listener League, Anthony Brown and Christopher Newby. Congratulations, guys. Great job with those reviews. Listen, more stolen iPhones and seeing multiple reviews on multiple platforms. It's fantastic. Thank you guys for doing that. We will be contacting you very soon. Congrats on joining the Listener League. All right, Dave, let's go to our next tier here. I guess we're going to call it a tier. Why not? This is going to be running backs 13 through 24, the RB2 tier. And at 13, we've got Josh Jacobs, 14, Rachaad White, 15, Alvin Kamara, 16, Joe Mixon, 17, James Cook, 18, David Montgomery, 19, James Conner, 20, Rhamondre Stevenson, 21, Najee Harris, 22, Zamir White, 23, Aaron Jones, and 24, DeAndre Swift. Now, Dave, there's a running back from this group that I've started to sour on. I'm just getting a little nervous. Maybe you can talk me out of it, but I'm getting nervous about Zamir White because we have kind of used the volume, the idea of his volume, to prop him up. And what I'm getting worried about here is that he might not be seeing as much volume as he did last year, and it might not be enough to prop him up. Not that he's a bad player, but that he might not be seeing the passing work because of Dylan Lowby being on the field. And as much as we hate it, there actually might be some Alexander Madison on the field. I know it sounds crazy, but the Raiders might be wanting to keep all their running backs fresh so that they can establish the run. You still have Zamir White as your running back 21. I've got him at running back 26. So what keeps him near top 20 status for you?
I mean, I'm moved him down a little bit as well. Earlier in the offseason, I had him as RB16, I believe was the highest that I've had him in my rankings. But like you mentioned, the Dylan Lowby drumbeat that we're getting out of Las Vegas is certainly concerning. And that was one of the things that I talked about with Zamir White is that if you looked last year, he was surprisingly involved as a pass catcher, something we didn't see much of at all in college because he was split in the field with James Cook, who was gobbling up all of the targets there. Last year when Josh Jacobs wasn't playing, Zamir White was involved as a pass catcher. And I said, maybe that'll bleed over into 2024, but it doesn't look like it. That being said, I don't want to overreact and just say, well, Zamir White was getting carries in the second half of a preseason game, so now he's out of my top 30. We made that mistake a couple of years ago with Josh Jacobs, and I don't want to do it again. We made the mistake last year with Dameon Pierce saying, his preseason usage, we need to move him up. So it's a delicate balance when you want to move players around based on preseason narratives and preseason drumbeat. I think you want to move them a little bit, but you don't want to overreact either. So I'm still steadfast in my belief that Zamir White is just a good running back. And there are some red flags here. They could be a potential dead zone running back, but this is a guy who is 220 pounds, 6 foot. He's got size adjusted speed score in the 96th percentile. He's, that worked out last year where we saw him with a solid breakaway run rate where he was 16th in the league with a breakaway run on almost 5% of his carries. So I still think there is an opportunity here. Maybe he's not going to have that super high ceiling that we had hoped for initially, but I think there's going to be enough volume that you can draft Zamir White and use him as an RB2. Of course, you might be able to pick somebody off of waivers at some point in the season. Maybe Zamir White is just kind of a placeholder, but I think he's a good running back and he's still going to see 200 plus opportunities. So I'm okay drafting him in the 7th or 8th round if he falls to there, but he's not a guy that I'm aggressively pounding the table for like I was in the spring.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm at as well. I think that the Luke Getsy stuff is also a little concerning, right?
Mhm.
Like we've seen him kind of almost wherever he's been have split backfields, and we saw this with Chicago. We've seen it with Green Bay, and there was a specific sentence from Antonio Pierce, the head coach, who said, "Man, Zamir White looks good. He looks the part, but we're going to be competitive. If you have a bad play, we're going to take you off the field, and you need to compete for your time on the field." Because he said Alexander Madison's a very good back, Dylan Lowby's very good back, and so it seems like he's not just ready to say Zamir White is the guy. He's probably saying we want him to be the guy, we want him to be the starter, but there seems like there's still a little bit of trepidation there. And I think that's where I'm starting to lean as well. It's just a little bit of trepidation, but he seems like a really fun RB2 to have uh, because you don't have to spend up on him. I think it's all really going to depend for me where he gets drafted. Next question on here, Dave. Who is the most underrated running back in this group for you? Because, I mean, this is running backs 13 through 24 in our rankings. There's got to be someone here that you're saying, you know what? They deserve to be a bit higher, or they could be a bit higher by the time we finish this upcoming fantasy football season.
So I really like this tier of running backs because they're all getting pushed down. This is kind of the dead zone running backs. We used to see these guys going in like rounds 2 and 3, but now they're getting pushed into rounds 4, 5, 6, 7. And I think there's some great values here. So I kind of like throwing darts at all of these running backs. Josh Jacobs is a guy to me who could potentially see 250 plus carries and a really good Green Bay offense. So I like him. I've got him inside my top 12. Alvin Kamara, the per game RB5 last year, is now getting drafted as like a back end RB2 when everybody has just collectively agreed that Alvin Kamara is dust for some reason. David Montgomery last year, even after the breakout when he missed some time due to injury, Jahmyr Gibbs broke out and we said, well, David Montgomery's kind of done here. He still came back from week 10 onward and was giving us top 20 production. Rhamondre Stevenson is a guy who got linked up or inked up on a long-term deal with the Patriots. And I think that he's going to get a lot of run in this Alex Van Pelt offense. And then Najee Harris is another guy who we have just kind of written off for dead at this point, but Arthur Smith is going to want to run this offense through his running backs and tight ends like he always does. Najee Harris, we saw him in his rookie year pull 100 plus targets. I don't think that volume is going to be there, but I think he's going to be involved as a pass catcher and a rusher. So I don't have one guy that I'm going to give you an answer to. The I like a lot of the guys in this tier, and I'm just going to try to draft, 2 or 3 of these guys in almost every single one of my drafts.
I was about to say, so your most underrated running back is everybody. Got it. Cool.
I
Very
mean, this is a good
clearish
tier, and
answer.
I didn't even mention Joe Mixon, who's a guy that I've talked about a lot on this show. His skill set pairs up so well with the run scheme that they do here in Houston. So, James Conner is another guy. Everybody, there's a few guys that I'm not crazy about. Rachaad White might be a little bit overvalued. James Cook a little bit overvalued. Aaron Jones, not crazy about him, but over half of the guys in this tier, I am ahead of consensus on and want to draft on my teams.
There was a guy you mentioned there at the end, and he's one of the players that I think could be the most underrated in this group, and it's James Conner. I've already talked a
Mhm.
lot about Alvin Kamara, how much we love him. But James Conner was the guy that, as I started to do a little bit more of my research, it really stood out to me how strong he finished last year and how good he is when Kyler Murray is on the field. Dave, from week 13 on, so it was the final 6 weeks of the season. Just take a guess. Where do you think James Conner finished amongst running backs during that span? The most
Or
important span of the season.
I'm gonna say RB8.
So in total, he was the RB2. On
Whew.
a per game basis, he was the RB1.
Wow.
Ahead of Christian McCaffrey, ahead of Breece Hall, ahead of Kyren Williams, ahead of all these players that we love. Granted, during that time span, there was a whole bunch of touchdowns being scored, but I'm kind of getting to the point where it's like we really, yes, we can expect touchdown variance, but we should not ding players saying, "Well, they scored a bunch of touchdowns. That's not going to happen again." Well, no, we've been shown that they can score touchdowns, and this Cardinals offense could get even better. And I think what's happening right now is that average draft position for James Conner is falling so much because everyone's been scared of Trey Benson. But Dave,
Trey
the
Benson
reports
has
are right
looked
now
terrible. He's looked terrible in the preseason.
it's rough. He was not one of my favorites out of this running back group. I think I had him as like RB3 out of the rookies, and a lot of people were surprised by that. I'm curious to see. He has the skills, he has the athleticism that he can be a good NFL running back, but it might take a little bit of time. This might not be a thing where James Conner is left for dead. If the Cardinals are trying to compete this year, James Conner could still see a ton of volume, get a lot of goal line work, and still get the usage in the passing game that he was seeing last year.
Yeah, based on what I've seen from Trey Benson so far through his first 2 preseason games, like if they were playing, if week 1 was this weekend, I don't think Trey Benson would be on the field. Like he is a liability. He's scared of contact. He's doing way too much east-west. He's hitting these little pitter-patter footsteps in the backfield. You know, it's just he is not looking ready for the NFL game. And like you said, he's athletic. He can get there eventually. But anyone that's concerned about Trey Benson coming in here and like forcing a timeshare, that's not going to happen, at least early in the season. Maybe, you know, he can develop as the year goes on. But the one other thing I want to say about James Conner is that, you know, typically we see running backs as they get into age 26, 27, 28, they start to trend down in efficiency. Last year, yards after contact per attempt, James Conner had the most since 2019, second most of his career. His broken tackle rate was the highest of his career. While a lot of running backs, you know, typically at age 29, we see them trending down quickly. James Conner had arguably the most efficient season of his career. So just aging like a bottle of fine wine out here. James Conner still looking pretty good.
And that's why I bring up those final weeks, because normally if we saw a trend where, okay, in this older season, he was trending downward, he started off hot, then yeah, I get it. He finished off hot. And it was very different from what we would expect. Last thing I want to ask about this RB2 group, and this is a tough one to ask and probably a tough one to answer, but which running back do you think you are most likely to be wrong about? It could either be in a positive way or a negative way. Which running back just do you have the least amount of certainty on?
DeAndre Swift, I've got him as my RB 24, which is
Same.
low. Like based on what you've seen from DeAndre Swift over the years, like he's been very efficient on a per touch basis because he catches a lot of passes and didn't see it last year, but typically he's at a pretty good touchdown rate. So DeAndre Swift right now, I think a lot of people are just saying like he is going to be the running back for the Bears and he's going to get all of the touches there. And his ADP reflects that people are expecting the Bears to be good and DeAndre Swift to be the workhorse there. But I'm not ready to throw in the towel on Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert, 2 running backs that I think are good. And I think that they're going to be heavily involved. And I know you're going to laugh at this, Alfredo, but Velus Jones Jr. is going to get touches this year, whether you want to see it or not. He is getting 100% of his reps in camp and in the preseason as a running
All
back.
right.
Now, I don't think that Velus Jones is a guy that you need to go out and draft. That's not what I'm saying. But he's probably going to end up with 100 backfield touches this year. And that is enough to really dramatically cap the upside for DeAndre Swift. So I think we're going to see some Roshan Johnson, some Khalil Herbert, and some Velus Jones here. And that's what worries me. But of course, where I could be wrong is that maybe DeAndre Swift is the workhorse. And maybe the Chicago Bears offense is going to be great. And DeAndre Swift finishes as a top 10 running back. I don't think it could happen, but it is possible.
That was fun. That was a
I'm telling
fun
you,
little
man.
Beals Jones
I'm telling
minute.
you, I'm telling Velus Jones. We'll revisit at the end of the season, but based on what I am reading out of camp, what I've been seeing
Is it the
preseason
Bears
usage,
analytics department that's posting stuff about
no.
Beals Jones?
I think what this is that Ryan Poles in his first year as an NFL GM reached dramatically for Velus Jones and has been trying to prove that that was the right pick ever since. He's got bricks for hands, but he is a freak athlete, and I think that he's just kind of following the same trajectory that we saw from another Tennessee guy, Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson waited till year 9 to make that switch to running back. They're just doing it a little bit earlier with Velus Jones. I'm not saying to go out and draft Velus Jones. I'm just saying that he's going to be just involved enough that it could dampen the ceiling for DeAndre Swift.
I'm glad we did this.
Way too
I'm
much
really
time on
glad we
Velus
did this.
Jones.
You just got to stop. You have to be stopped. All right, running back 3 territory here. Let's start with the running back 25. We've got Tony Pollard from Tennessee Titans. 26, Jonathon Brooks. 27, Javonte Williams. 28, Brian Robinson Jr. 29, Raheem Mostert. 30, Chase Brown. 31, Jaylen Warren. 32, Devin Singletary. 33, Austin Eckler. 34, Tyjae Spears. 35, Gus Edwards. And 36, Jerome Ford. Dave, this is usually where we see somebody pop up out of this group, finishes way higher than expected. Out of this group of 12 running backs 25 to 36 in our rankings, who do you think is most likely or has the best chance to finish as a top 15 running back in points per game? I think you and I might have the same answer on this one.
Yeah, it's gonna be Jonathon Brooks, especially with the caveat that
Yep.
you said, like, in points per game, and that's
Yep.
kind of the tough part in just doing rankings. Like Fantasy Pros, they have their expert consensus rankings, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is that those aren't so much rankings as they are projections because they don't score on a per game basis. So a guy like Jonathon Brooks, you're gonna see buried way down in expert consensus rankings because the reality is it is a projections contest, and when we're projecting for Jonathon Brooks, we're projecting him to miss a quarter of the season. But if you're getting late season value from Jonathon Brooks, where he's giving you a top 15 per game production, maybe even top 10 production over the second half of the season, that's a player that I want to draft much, much earlier than his consensus projection is going to have him at. So, when you look, he's typically rated in the RB30 to RB40 range because we have to expect him to miss a chunk of the season. But if I draft Jonathon Brooks, I'm pairing him up with maybe it's Chuba Hubbard, the guy who's going to get the early season work for the Panthers. Maybe I'm pairing him up with Jerome Ford, the guy who's going to get the early season work for the Browns. Maybe Gus Edwards, the healthy guy right now in Los Angeles. I'm okay kind of weathering the storm for the first 3 to 5 weeks without Jonathon Brooks, knowing that when he is healthy and he gets ramped up, which is probably going to be sometime around week 7 or 8 that we see him with a 100% workload, that at that point we could be looking at potential top 10 production. So it's kind of one of those players where projections are going to be low on him, but rankings should be much, much higher on him because you're going to be getting good production during the most valuable part of the season.
So, Dave, I did some quick math here, and I want to make this connection before I say
Uh-oh.
it.
Alfredo doing math. This could be dangerous.
This could go really bad, really bad. Dave Canales,
Stick
we
to the
know,
film, buddy.
was the offensive coordinator for the Bucks. Shut up. Was the offensive coordinator for the Bucks last season. We all know what happened with Rachaad White. He
Mhm.
had a great year. Top 6 running back in PPR points. Points per game, a little bit different, but closer to around 16 points. He was a top 12 running back in points per game. If you take away the first 3 weeks of Rachaad White's season, he still finished as running back 12
Mhm.
overall. That does not adjust his points per game. You're still getting a high quality running back because of the volume. I think objectively, you and I can both say, based on talent, based on skill, based on tape, based on data, Jonathon Brooks is a better prospect than Rachaad White ever was.
Yep.
The expectations for him in the NFL are higher than it's ever been for Rachaad White. So even if we miss the first 3 games of the season for Jonathon Brooks and he goes out there and plays and gets the type of volume that Rachaad White did in the passing game and in the run game, yeah, we're looking at a guy that could very easily be top 15 in points per game and probably even top 20 in overall points. It could be even higher. I think the expectation is not high enough for Jonathon Brooks. And you and I are above consensus on Brooks, but I think honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you and I start to get a little bit higher on him as we get closer to the season here. Is there anything that would put him in the top 24 for you?
Um, I mean, he's pretty much already there for me. I've got him, I think, just outside of my top 24.
You
And,
have him
and
at
like I
running
said,
back 26, and I have him at running back 25.
yeah, so we're both pretty much right there, and I'm drafting him a little bit earlier than that. It's just the like I said, this is just kind of a classic case of projections versus rankings. Projections are going to be a little bit lower on him, but rankings should be higher on him. And I kind of blend some of my projections into my rankings, but like in a vacuum, I've got a lot of guys that are ranked ahead of Jonathon Brooks that I'd prefer Jonathon Brooks ahead of. Like Tony Pollard is a guy that I technically have a few spots ahead of Jonathon Brooks, but if I'm on
Yeah.
the clock and I'm torn between Tony Pollard and Jonathon Brooks, I'm drafting Jonathon Brooks in that situation, but I just have to bump him down a little bit for the uncertainty and not knowing exactly when he is going to play. Another thing with Jonathon Brooks is that I'll just say you can kind of work him in any build, and I feel like so many people say he's a zero running back target only, but if you've got like a hero running back build, like if you've already drafted a running back in the first 3 rounds, I think you'd still add Jonathon Brooks there, knowing that you're keeping him on the bench. If you're going zero running back, you pair him up with some of these guys I talked about: Chuba Hubbard, Jerome Ford, Gus Edwards, Devin Singletary. Uh, he's just a guy, regardless of who I have drafted in the first 6 rounds. If I'm in round 7 and Jonathon Brooks is there, I'm taking him.
You mentioned Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard, a guy that you have a little bit higher than Jonathan Brooks. You also have Tony Pollard quite a bit higher than his teammate, Tyjae Spears. So, for example, here, you've got Tony Pollard at running back 23, but then Tyjae Spears at running back 37. Why such a big gap between these guys when coaches are constantly saying this is a 1A, 1B situation? What makes you lean so much more confidently towards Tony Pollard in your rankings?
I just think he's a better running back, and I mean they're both good running backs. Like I don't dislike Tajay Spears at all. If it weren't for the knee injury, he probably would have been an early second round pick coming out of the draft. He's a very good running back, but Tony Pollard just has the size advantage. He's heavier, he's taller, he's a little bit faster, a little bit stronger. I think Tajay Spears can do more fun things out in space, and I think he might be a little bit more involved as a pass catcher. But I think that when we start projecting where the work is going to go, I don't think it's going to be a 50-50 split. And that's always kind of how we look at these situations with two players with similar skill sets. But I think that Tony Pollard is built for a heavier workload. And I think that as we've seen in years past, he does better when he's splitting the load with somebody and his legs are a little bit fresher. We saw him last year with a true RB1 workload and he struggled a little bit. Maybe that was coming off of the injury. Maybe that was just the pressure of being the guy. We also saw horrendous touchdown luck, but the metrics were still pretty good last year. If you look over the second half of the season, he was still breaking tackles. He still had the breakaway runs, all the things that we liked about Tony Pollard early in his career. So now that he's a year removed from the foot surgery, I think that we see him look more like the player that we saw and fell in love with in 2021 and 2022 than the player we were disappointed by in 2023.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there, but I don't have quite as big of a gap because I don't think the difference in running back talent is that big or that overstated between Pollard and Spears. I do think we could see Spears actually out on the field in more receiving sets than Pollard, which is odd because that's been Pollard's strength throughout his career.
Mm,
I am just overall worried about the Titans offense. I'm really worried
same.
about them. I know there's people getting excited about Calvin Ridley, and I know there's people getting excited about Will Levis, and I've even heard just stuff as simple as Will Levis is too ripped to play quarterback, and
I
even
mean,
there's
hey,
never been
I'll, you look at all the Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Patrick Mahomes. Like,
dad bod, baby.
yeah, dad bods. That's what you
There's
want
something
in
to
your
it.
franchise quarterback. Yeah.
It's science. It's science. I wouldn't expect anyone to understand.
What I will say
One
before
of
we
the guys.
move on to the
Yep.
next oh, sorry. I was gonna say before we move on to the next here, one guy that I really do want to talk about here because I'm looking and we are both way above consensus on Chase Brown, and I think
Yeah.
rightfully so. I don't know if that's what you were setting up to talk about next, but
Nope.
Chase Brown, you talk about one of the players that like we could be wrong about in the last year. I think Chase Brown is one of those guys that everybody could be wrong about. And I think that the concerns, who's getting the touches? Is it going to be Chase Brown or is it going to be Zack Moss? Has pushed both of these guys so far down draft boards. The reality is that we've seen an RB1 come out of the Cincinnati office pretty much every single year for the last 6 years. And now, I think early in the offseason, a lot of us expected that to go Zack Moss's way because we've seen him handle a big workload before. But man, the drumbeat out of camp for Chase Brown is just getting so loud. And he's a player that I've liked throughout the entire offseason, but I just keep moving him up, keep moving him up, keep moving him up. I've got him as my RB27 right now, and that still feels too low.
Yeah. Looking at my rankings, I've got him at RB30. I have just a few concerns with how this backfield could be split. I'm almost worried that neither of these guys are really going to be that fantasy relevant. But if there's a guy that I have to pick who's going to be fantasy relevant on a good offense, it's the guy who catches passes and it's the guy who has the explosive plays, which is
Right.
why I'm willing to go Chase Brown above consensus and above Zack Moss. I think it's that simple. I don't think there's anything else we can give. There wasn't a whole lot out of his rookie film or his rookie numbers that tells us, man, this guy's a future breakout star. Sure, was he explosive? Yeah. There's not enough. It's a small sample size. It's only a few weeks. Even when you look at his best weeks of the season, Dave, it was 8 PPR points per game. We're talking about a guy who was in the running back 3 category. So I want to be more excited. And you and I both showed that in our rankings. We're willing to take him above consensus, but there's just enough of that trepidation. And I think it's going to actually come down to who stays healthy in this
Yeah.
backfield. And if one of these guys stays healthy and it is Chase Brown, yeah, then we're going to the moon. Like that. That's just where it is.
Yeah, what I'll add about Chase Brown, third in the league in breakaway run rate behind only Devon Achane and Keaton Mitchell last year. So yeah, on a small sample size, but that's what we expected from Chase Brown was him to have breakaway plays, and that carried over to the NFL. And then the other, I think, concern that's baked into his ADP is a lot of people see that he's kind of undersized and say that, well, he can't handle a big workload. He was a beast in college at Illinois, like carried a ton of
Mhm.
balls. And actually, in his final year in college, the only player in college football in 2022 that had more scrimmage yards than Chase Brown was Bijan Robinson. So this is a guy who can shoulder a big load, has shown that he's been able to do it in college. And I think if we see that role grow a little bit, I think like you said, to the moon. Like there's a sky high ceiling here with Chase Brown. And the reality is you can draft him in like round 10 and potentially be getting a top 10 running back.
By the way, really quick, we don't have to dive into this, but I'm going to keep banging the drum for Javonte Williams. He is now
Yeah.
firmly in my top 24 running backs. I know that's going to be very rich for some people. I think he is giving you easy RB2 value at an RB3 cost. It's a guy who is going to be catching passes, getting usage. And before the Broncos had just given up last year when Javonte was on the field from weeks 7 through 14, that stretch where he wasn't recovering from the ACL, LCL, MCL, PCL, all the L's, and the Broncos had not given up, we're talking about a guy who was running back 17 on a
Yeah.
really bad offense. So it's there. Like it's there, guys. Don't overthink this. I know we're excited about all the other running backs in that team, but like you said earlier, I can't remember which running back you said this about, but we can like Javonte Williams and like Jaleel McLaughlin. Like it's
Mhm.
not something where they kill each other in fantasy value, especially with Bo Nix at quarterback. I think it's just going to be dump off city.
Yeah, we're both ahead of consensus on Javante. He's a player that I've been drafting pretty frequently as well.
Yeah. All right. Let's go down to our next tier here into the running back 4 tier, where at 37, Ezekiel Elliott, 38, Zack Moss, 39, Blake Corum, 40, Ty Chandler, 41, Chuba Hubbard, 42, Khalil Herbert, 43, Zach Charbonnet, 44, Jalen Wright, 45, Trey Benson, 46, Rico Dowdle, 47, Tyler Algier, and at 48, Nicholas Chubb. Dave, I notice a big split here between two players, very similar to the Pollard Spears situation we talked about just before on the Cowboys for you. You've got a big 21 spot difference between the Cowboys running backs. Ezekiel Elliott is your running back 31. Rico Dowdle is your running back 52. Is this anti Dowdle propaganda, or is this pro Zeke propaganda, or is this just whatever? It's the Cowboys. Just pick a running back.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I've gone back and watched so much Rico Dowdle film, and I've gone through the numbers, and I don't get what people see in Rico Dowdle. I do not see a good running back at all. And I know like some of the camp or some of the reports we're getting out of Dallas camp is that he looks good and that he should lead the running back room in touches. And I think he might. Like he might actually be the touch leader overall out of this backfield. But I think when you look at where the high value touches are going to go, those almost all project to go Zeke's way. Like Zeke is the trusted guy when they get near the goal line. Zeke is a phenomenal pass blocker, and we saw last year in his stint with New England that he's pretty good at catching the ball too. So I think Dowdle is going to be that guy who is just going to be eating a lot of volume in between the 20s on early downs, but that's not what you want to see in fantasy football. I think when they get into passing down formations and goal line formations, that's where we're going to see Zeke come in. So if I'm taking a risk on this backfield, which I think you should take a risk on this backfield, the Dallas Cowboys are going to be good and they're going to score a lot of points and there's going to be lots of opportunities for running backs here. I want to draft the guy who I expect to get the high value touches, the targets and the goal line work. And I think those are way more likely to go Zeke's way than they are to go Dowdle's.
I've got them ranked as running backs 41 and 42 because I just don't know what the hell to do with the Dallas
Yeah,
Cowboys running
I
backs.
get it. I get it.
Um, it's for the reasons you said. Dowdle could get more touches. He's a bit more explosive. He's inconsistent. He gets hurt. So I'm willing to put him at 41, just ahead of Zeke. Zeke could fall into the end zone, but okay, he's got to stay healthy too. He looks really, really slow, really inefficient. Um, I know that our fellow staffer here at Football Guys says, I doubt that an NFL team is willing to just part ways with a starting running back and let the Cowboys pick them up. But I don't even think it needs to be a starting running back at this point. I think it could end up just being a backup running back that's on someone's roster that could easily be the one to take over in Dallas. And we saw something similar last year in Buffalo where I don't think anyone was thinking about Latavius Murray.
Right.
You had James Cook, you had Damian Harris, And then all of a sudden, by it's like week 4 or 5, whatever it was, Latavius Murray is the guy who was getting touchdowns and goal line carries. And that's something that could absolutely happen here in Dallas. Sure, I have one ranked ahead of the other. I don't know that I want either of them, even at cost. Like it just feels like such a sunken cost where I don't know if there's the upside there. I know you feel a little bit differently with Zeke, that he could fall into the end zone a bit more. Let's go to our next player on here, because both of us are a lot higher on Khalil Herbert than consensus, and I'm gonna tone it down because Khalil Herbert's been my baby since he came into the league. I go around preaching the gospel of Khalil Herbert, how good he is, all the propaganda possible. Dave, I've got him at running back 40. You've got him at running back 46. ADP has him going as the running back 54. So we are both quite a bit higher on Khalil Herbert. And I tweeted this the other day. Might have been for a little bit of engagement, but also kind of true. Khalil Herbert might actually just be the best running back on the Bears offense because of how good he is in the running game, how consistent he is at making tacklers miss. He's not a guy that's going to be losing you yards when you hand him the ball, yet he still makes explosive plays. So, Dave, why are we so much higher on Khalil Herbert than the rest of consensus?
He's just a good running back, and it's kind of funny. I feel like DeAndre Swift and Khalil Herbert are two guys that the film and the analytics just tell vastly different stories. And when you look at DeAndre Swift, I say it all the time. Like, you look at his efficiency profile on paper, and you say, "Wow, this guy's one of the best running backs in the league." If that's true, why has he fallen in the bad graces of 3 consecutive coaching staffs? Because he does too much dancing in the backfield. He tries too hard to make defenders miss. He shies away from contact. You know what Khalil Herbert doesn't do? Shy away from contact. He doesn't dance around and try to make defenders miss. He's the type of running back that's going to put his head down and just run through you. He doesn't have this blazing speed or anything like that, but he just has a natural knack for finding creases. He can get really skinny and squeeze through small holes. He does all of the little things that NFL coaches really like. And then on the opposite side of the coin, you got DeAndre Swift, who does all of the things that NFL coaches absolutely hate. So Khalil Herbert is just a good football player that coaches have liked throughout his career. Of course, being in Chicago is going to be tough because Velus Jones is there. I'm totally kidding. We're not going to go on another Velus
Come on,
Jones
dude.
tangent. But I
Come
think
on.
the out with Khalil Herbert is that there is potential trade here. And, DeAndre Swift, he's got the contract. He's going to be around. Roschon Johnson is a guy that this staff drafted and paid up for, and they like, and he has shown some growth in year 2. And then, of course, like I said, the emergence of Velus Jones. He actually is going to be a part of this running back room. So Khalil Herbert might be expendable at this point to the Bears. He was drafted by Ryan Pace, not by Ryan Poles. He was drafted for a Matt Nagy offense, not a Matt Eberflus offense. And he kind of has been the odd man out over the years. So with teams like Dallas and the Chargers and some other teams out there looking for potential running back help, it wouldn't surprise me if he gets moved. But even if he doesn't get moved, he's a tweaked ankle away from another big workload. And we know he's a good running back and has been productive when he's on the field. So just comes down to him being very, very cheap and being a talented player. I'm willing to take that risk. Very minimal
This is
risk, I should add.
Yeah, I mean, this is my favorite analysis in all of fantasy football. And we can say, why are you high on a guy? Because he's
He's
good.
good. Yeah. Watch the tape,
That's
nerd.
it. He's really good. You don't even have to you watch the tape, look at the numbers, do
Yeah.
anything. Just like be aware that this person exists and they're good at football. It's that
Here's what
simple.
and like I said, like, Khalil Herbert is not a great athlete. Like, when you watch him run at first, you're like, he's kinda clunky, he's kinda slow, like, he doesn't have any, like, crazy
I wouldn't say he's
lateral
clunky.
quickness or anything. It's just he's just such a natural runner. Like, and I don't really know, like, he just kind of weaves his way through, and, you look at his, like, speed, like, he was a 4.55 guy, and, he's not huge, so size adjusted speed score, he's pretty average as far as athleticism, but he was 12th in the league in breakaway run rate last year because he's just able to find these creases. Like, it's just he's one of my favorite players to watch because he just understands how to run the football and he does it really, really well. And I think that's why coaches like him. Like I said, just a good football player, and it's not often that you could draft a good football player in round 14 of your draft.
Testing is not everything.
Mhm.
And we need to remember that every year when we get to the NFL combine, and maybe start to look at some other tests, maybe start to look at some other game film, because Khalil Herbert is phenomenal laterally, going side to side. When he finds these cutback lanes, there's a big reason that he's able to get these huge breakaway runs. That's what he's always been good at. He's a guy, he reminded me a lot of like D'Angelo Williams, former Panthers running back, when he was coming out. And Khalil Herbert's just, I'll finish the propaganda real quick. When he gets the touches, Dave, and you say he's a tweaked ankle away from getting, volume, last season, every time he got at least 18 touches, he was a top 10 fantasy running back. This is one of those guys, man, where if he just ends up somewhere where he can get some sort of volume, that's a league winner. It's a league winner right there. You put him on Dallas, and he is a league winning running back right there, especially at this cost. It's nuts. We'll move on. It's a lot of Khalil Herbert talk. We got a bunch of rookies in this tier, in this RB4 tier. Blake Corum, Jaylen Wright, Trey Benson. I don't think I'm missing anyone else, but out of those three, who is the guy that you are really wanting to leave your draft with between Corum, Wright, and Benson?
I'm trying to leave every draft with Blake Corum and Jaleel Wright. Like again, I'm going to cop out
Or
here. Like I
Jaylen Wright.
love this tier of running backs. I'll reach around or like whoever is earlier in ADP. If I see Corum ahead of Wright in ADP, I'll reach around early for Corum and then hope to get Jaylen Wright again in the next round. I, sorry, you made a face there. I thought did I say something wrong? Or you
Nope.
were just agreeing? Oh, yeah, I like
I
both of
just
these
like
guys a
making
lot.
faces at you.
I think Jaylen Wright, I've said it before, but like everything I said that I loved about Devon Achane last year, that speed in this offense, fireworks. Like we know what's going to happen. Like they're going to get him out in space and he's going to have huge plays and everybody's paying up for Devon Achane with a first or second round draft pick. And realistically, like it's not crazy to think that we can be getting similar production from Jaylen Wright, a guy who has an even better size adjusted speed score than Devon Achane, and we're getting him significantly later. I've kind of I'm not of the belief that Blake Corum is just going to steal the job from Kyren Williams like a lot of people expect, but he could take some of the goal line work and have a little bit of standalone value. But really, it's the contingent upside where Kyren Williams, a guy who struggled mightily with injuries last year, is already struggling with injuries in this preseason. If he gets injured, Blake Corum, is it crazy to say that we're going to look at him like, let's just say it's week 6. Blake Corum has looked okay in his limited touches in the first few weeks. Kyren Williams is out. We're immediately putting Blake Corum in as a top 10 weekly running back, right? Like that's where he's going to fall just because we know the volume is going to be there. So I want both of these guys. Jaylen Wright has the standalone value. He can break fantasy anytime make or break your fantasy week anytime he gets a long run. And then Blake Corum is a Kyren Williams injury away from being a potential top 5, top 10 running back. So these guys, again, much like I said with Jonathon Brooks, doesn't matter who I drafted early. I'm trying to leave every single draft with Blake Corum and Jaylen Wright.
Yeah, you're quite a bit higher on Jaylen Wright than I am. You've got Jaylen Wright as your running back 39, just behind Blake Corum, who
One
you have
spot
at running back.
behind.
Yeah, right. One spot behind Blake Corum, who you have at running back 38. I also have Blake Corum at running back 38. And I think what I'll say here is if I'm targeting one of these guys, it's going to be Corum, just because you start to look at this area and they're basically all what we call handcuffs, right? It's the next man up mentality. The thing is that we know what happens if Blake Corum is the next man up. Just like you said, if Kyren misses a game, Blake Corum is pretty much locked and loaded as a top 12 fantasy running back based on usage alone and based on the coaching staff there. Sean McVay, what he can do with running backs. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that if Corum is starting that week, he's going to be a top 12, top 15 guy. And I don't know if that happens with any of these other running backs. I mean, even very, very sure about that with Trey Benson. I'm not sure that's there, but Jaylen Wright is the guy. Like, I do worry that he'll end up still splitting time with a Raheem Mostert or whoever, even if Devon Achane misses time. I think there's a bit more has to break right for Jaylen Wright to be a guy who I'm plugging into my fantasy lineup confidently each week. But like you say, embrace the variance. And if Miami Dolphins backfield does turn into a 2-man show at some point, Jaylen Wright has tons of value. Dave, we've gone through our top 48 running backs here, but I know you, and you love to cater to drafts and drafters that are going a bit deeper, going into like round 20, round 22. Let's go nuts. Give me one deep sleeper to talk about here. Someone who's not even in our top 48 that you're saying, you know what, drafters, you want to get this guy with your last pick, or if you're in a long draft, deep rounds, go after him. Who's your guy?
We've already briefly mentioned Dylan Laube when talking about Zamir White and the pass catching upside that he had. So I'm not going to talk too much about Dylan Laube, but if you're in a deep, deep draft, I like him as a late round flyer on a team that could be playing from behind a lot. I want the pass catching running back on that team potentially. But the guy I want to talk about here is Justice Hill, a guy that, again, we're talking like round 20 and beyond here. Everybody is understandably excited about Derrick Henry. He got the big contract. He's been one of the best running backs in the league for the last almost decade now. I mean, he has just continued doing it year after year. But everything that we're hearing out of Baltimore is that Justice Hill is the RB1. And John Harbaugh, I take what he says with a grain of salt. He really likes to mislead reporters and the general public. I think Derrick Henry is absolutely going to be the guy here who gets the majority of the touches near the goal line. But Justice Hill isn't a slouch. He's been in this system for years. He understands the system and has consistently found opportunities to get meaningful work in this role. So right now, Justice Hill is just being left for dead. And, I think people are expecting Keaton Mitchell to come back at some point, which he might. But, we got to remember he was an undrafted guy who is coming off of a late season ACL tear. He might not see the field this year. Rasheen Ali is a guy who got some early hype in the spring after the draft, but realistically hasn't made much of a buzz at all in camp. So, right now, Derrick Henry probably is going to be the leader here in Baltimore out of the backfield, but it's not a foregone conclusion that Justice Hill could be heavily involved, and you can get him for free in round 20 of your draft. So just one of those guys that I think people aren't really thinking about right now. And I am trying to leave my deep drafts with Justice Hill.
Nice. I kind of figured you were going there. I know you've mentioned him a couple times every time we've talked about Derrick Henry. Dylan Laube, you mentioned him as well. I think there's like a flash in the pan that we might be considering Eric Gray in case, Devin Singletary isn't, making it through the season. But I think that was more so if Tyrone Tracy was going to be missing time. I think there's just
Who is back? I got to say, like,
right.
risen
Like,
from the dead, like
oh,
aircast, carted off the field. And we said, all right, well, Tyrone Tracy's season is over. And then 48 hours later, he's running 100% and cutting on a practice field, which is just thank God. But yeah,
yeah.
Tyrone Tracy is another guy that I love. Like if he, because I've seen it now where he was getting steamed up in like round 14 and 15 of drafts, and then since that injury, his ADP plummeted and hasn't bounced back. That you can probably get him in round 18, 19, or 20 now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a bunch of names of guys that we could talk about here, and the one that I know listeners and viewers are probably just tired of me talking about him. I'm going to keep pounding the table for him because he needs to be one of your last picks in your draft or even earlier, and it's Ray Davis. I
Yeah,
think that we're still not putting enough respect on this man's name, and we are not considering how involved he is going to be in this running game. And we look at everyone else who is a backup running back, they're going in that running back 25 to 48 range. Ray Davis is the only guy really who's second on a team. Maybe Justice Hill is the other guy, but second running back on a team that has every down capabilities that we're just like, we're not quite drafting him high enough. And I think it's just because most people don't know about him. But in the preseason, he's been phenomenal. The college film, absolutely loved it. He's a guy that plays all three downs, works in the passing game, good pass blocker, tough runner, gets the easy yards every single time. And I love this stat here from Jacob Gibbs over at CBS Sportsline. Buffalo Bills rookie running back Ray Davis avoided 5 tackles and created 40 rushing yards after contact in his second preseason game per True Media Sports. He was on the field he had 11 carries, or excuse me, I think it was less, 11 opportunities. So less carries than that. And this is what he's doing already in preseason against NFL caliber talent. Like, this is a guy who is going to be heavily involved. I think that if you are not paying attention to him, if you are not drafting him late, you are making a mistake.
yeah. And I was going to talk about Ray Davis. I pivoted Justice Hill because I wanted to let you talk about Ray Davis, but
You knew.
yeah, we loved him in the draft process, and he slid in drafts because of his age. He's a 25-year-old rookie, but that doesn't matter for 2024. I couldn't care less if he's 27 years old, if he's a rookie. Like he's going to get opportunities here. You talked about the Buffalo Bills trying to find this running back that can kind of be a complement to James Cook over the last couple of years, and they've done so unsuccessfully. Ray Davis has already checked the boxes through the preseason. Everything he did in college is showing up in his preseason NFL tape. I think he's going to be heavily involved. And one of the reasons that you and I mean, we've been getting mocked for it, Alfredo. I don't know if you read the YouTube comments. People hate that we are down on James Cook because of Ray Davis. But
Okay.
James Cook isn't going to see the opportunity that he saw last year because of Ray Davis. He is a good running back. The only reason he slid in the draft is because of his age. You know, you might not get a
Yep.
full 4 years out of Ray Davis like you do with other rookie running backs, but he's going to be heavily involved for the next 2 to 3 years. And that absolutely caps the upside for James Cook and is one of the reasons you and I are both a little bit lower on him.
I just I have the exact numbers for you in preseason week 2 here. Ray Davis, 8 carries, 58 yards, 7.3
Yeah.
yards per carry,
Yeah.
4 missed tackles forced. Yeah, he's pretty damn good.
And one of
He's
those was on a
damn good.
run up the middle too, where he broke multiple tackles, was able
Oh,
to
it's
rip off a
gorgeous.
big play. Like he's you know, I'd say his play style is kind of similar to Khalil Herbert, like where he just has this natural ability where he just ping pongs off defenders and finds the creases, and what looks like it should be a loss of yardage, somehow he just barrels forward for 12 yards, and it's like, how did he even do that? And Ray Davis is just a magician when he gets the ball in his hands. So big fan of Ray Davis. He's another guy that I'm trying to get late in all of my drafts.
You could tell I have a running back type. It's those
Mhm.
guys that they run better than they probably should given their physical abilities, man. But it's fantastic to see players like
It's
that.
contact balance, I think,
Yep.
is what people refer to that as, and some guys have it. A lot of times you see running backs get hit and they just topple over, and a guy like Khalil Herbert just hand on the ground, bounces right back up. Ray Davis does the same thing. You knock into him, he bounces off a defender and just stays upright and just keeps those legs churning. And Ray Davis does that well.
Yep. Well, I mean, you did it, Dave. You did it. You said we were going to over deliver more than 48 running backs. Nailed it. So there we go.
So
We
is
went
Wheelers
through our
Jones, and we cleared 50 running backs that we talked about today.
I'm going to ignore that last part. But we did it. We cleared 50 running backs here in today's episode, and we're going to be back again tomorrow talking about the wide receiver rankings and where we're a little bit higher, lower, where we disagree. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. For myself, for Dave Kluge, we'll see you next time. Adios.